Sarah Martinez wiped the sweat from her forehead as she rushed between tables at Romano's restaurant. It was Friday night, and the place was packed with people. She'd been working here for 3 months now, taking as many shifts as she could get. The money was never enough, but she needed every dollar she could make. Sarah was 24 years old and tired, not just tired from work, but tired from life. Every morning she woke up at 6 to practice piano before her classes started. Then she went to school at the Chicago College of Performing Arts. After classes, she came straight to Romano's to work until late at night. This had been her routine for months. The restaurant was fancy. It had white tablecloths, expensive wine, and rich people who left good tips. Sarah liked working there better than her other jobs. The customers were usually polite, and the food was really good. Sometimes she got to take leftovers home, which helped save money on groceries. Tonight felt different, though. Sarah could not explain why, but something in the air made her feel like change was coming. Maybe it was just because she was so tired. She had worked double shifts for the past 2 weeks. Her feet hurt, her back ached, and she missed playing piano. Really playing. Not just the quick practice sessions she managed to squeeze in between work and school. As Sarah carried a tray of drinks to table 12, she thought about her life. A year ago, everything was different. She had a scholarship that paid for most of her school. Her parents helped with the rest. She could focus on music and not worry about money. But then her father lost his job and her family needed help. Sarah had to give up her scholarship to work more hours. Now she was barely keeping up with school payments. The kitchen bell rang, pulling Sarah back to reality. She grabbed the hot plates and headed to the private dining room. This was the fancy part of Romano's where important people came to eat. The room had a beautiful piano in the corner that nobody ever played. Sarah always wondered why they kept it there if no one used it. She pushed open the heavy wooden door with her shoulder, balancing the tray carefully. The private dining room was full tonight. There were 6 men in expensive suits sitting around the big table. They were talking loudly about business deals and money. Sarah had heard similar conversations before. Rich people always seemed to talk about the same things. One man sat at the head of the table. He looked younger than the others, maybe in his 30s. He had dark hair and was wearing a navy blue suit that probably cost more than Sarah made in 3 months. Something about him seemed familiar, but Sarah could not place where she might have seen him before. As she served the appetizers, Sarah tried not to listen to their conversation, but it was hard not to hear them talking about millions of dollars, like it was nothing special. They mentioned companies she had heard of, deals in the news and places around the world. This was a different world from hers. The man at the head of the table was doing most of the talking. He seemed relaxed and confident, making jokes that made the other men laugh. Sarah noticed he was not like the other wealthy customers she served. He actually looked at her when she brought his food, said thank you, and seemed like a normal person despite his obvious wealth. While Sarah was refilling water glasses, her eyes wandered to the piano in the corner. It was a beautiful black Steinway, grand piano. The wood was polished so well that she could see her reflection in it. The keys looked perfect, white and clean. Sarah wondered if it was even tuned. Such a waste to have such a beautiful instrument just sitting there like decoration. She had been playing piano since she was 4 years old. Her grandmother taught her the first songs on an old upright piano in her house. From there, Sarah fell in love with music. She practiced every day, entered competitions, and won scholarships to study with the best teachers. Piano was not just something she did, it was who she was. But lately, Sarah barely had time to play. Between work and school, she was lucky if she got 30 minutes a day to practice. Her fingers were getting stiff from lack of use. Her technique was suffering. Sometimes she worried she was losing her skills, all because she needed to make money to survive. The men at the table were still talking business when Sarah finished serving them. She was about to leave when one of them mentioned a name she recognized, Marcus Chen. Sarah had heard that name on the news recently. He was some kind of tech billionaire who had just bought another company for billions of dollars. She looked more carefully at the man at the head of the table and realized that must be him. Marcus Chen was famous for being young, smart, and very rich. Sarah had read articles about him in magazines at the grocery store. He started his first company when he was still in college and sold it for millions. Then he started another one and sold that for even more money. Now he was one of the richest people in the country, but he was still young enough to be Sarah's older brother. As Sarah headed back to the kitchen, she glanced one more time at the piano. For just a moment, she imagined sitting at that bench and playing. Really playing, not just practicing scales and exercises. She imagined her fingers flying across those perfect keys, making beautiful music fill the room. But that was just a dream. She was a waitress now, not a pianist. The kitchen was hot and noisy when Sarah returned. The head chef was yelling at someone about overcooking the fish. Two other waitresses were complaining about difficult customers. The dishwasher was running behind, and dirty plates were piling up everywhere. This was Sarah's real world, not the quiet elegance of concert halls or music schools. Sarah loaded her tray with more food orders and prepared to go back out. She had 6 more tables to serve and at least 4 more hours of work ahead of her. Her feet were already sore, but she could not afford to slow down. Good tips tonight might mean she could buy groceries tomorrow instead of eating ramen noodles again. As she walked back toward the dining room, Sarah thought about her dreams. She still wanted to be a concert pianist. She still believed she had the talent for it. But every day those dreams felt further away. Every shift at Romano's took time away from practice. Every hour she spent serving food was an hour she could have spent making music. But what choice did she have? Dreams did not pay rent. Dreams did not buy food. Dreams did not help her family when they needed money. So Sarah kept working, kept serving, kept pushing her dreams to the back of her mind. She had no idea that in just a few minutes everything in her life was about to change forever. Sarah pushed through the kitchen doors with a fresh tray of appetizers for the private dining room. Her arms were getting tired from carrying heavy trays all evening, but she tried not to show it. Good waitresses never looked tired or complained, no matter how they felt. The private dining room was warmer now. The 6 men had been eating and drinking for over an hour. Their voices were louder, their laughter more frequent. Sarah could smell expensive cologne mixed with wine and rich food. This was the smell of wealth, she thought to herself. As she approached their table, Sarah could hear Marcus Chen telling a funny story about his first business meeting. The other men were hanging on his every word, laughing at all the right moments. Sarah had noticed this before with very rich people. Everyone wanted to be their friend. So there I was, Marcus was saying, 22 years old, wearing my dad's suit that was too big for me, trying to convince these investors to give me money. I was so nervous I spilled coffee all over their conference table. The men around the table laughed loud and hard. Sarah began placing the small plates in front of each man. She moved quietly and efficiently, trying not to interrupt their conversation. She had learned that wealthy customers like to feel invisible service. They wanted their needs met without being bothered. But as Sarah reached across the table to serve Marcus his appetizer, her eyes drifted to the piano again. She could not help herself. The instrument was so beautiful, and she had not played a real piano in weeks. At school, she had to reserve practice time, and there were always other students waiting. Here was this perfect piano just sitting unused. Marcus noticed her looking. He followed her gaze to the corner of the room where the Steinway sat silent and elegant. A small smile crossed his face. Sarah quickly looked away, embarrassed that she had been caught staring. "Beautiful instrument, isn't it?" Marcus said directly to Sarah. She was surprised he was talking to her. Most customers acted like the wait staff were not really there. "Yes, sir. It's very beautiful," Sarah replied politely, trying to continue serving without making a big deal of the conversation. "Do you play?" Marcus asked, leaning back in his chair. His tone was casual, like he was just making small talk. Sarah hesitated. She was not supposed to chat with customers, especially not in the private dining room. But something about Marcus seemed different from other wealthy people she served. He actually seemed interested in her answer. "A little bit," Sarah said modestly. She did not want to sound like she was bragging. Marcus raised his eyebrows. "A little bit? Come on, you can be honest. I saw the way you were looking at that piano." That was not the look of someone who plays a little bit. The other men at the table were now paying attention to the conversation. Sarah felt uncomfortable being the center of attention. She was just supposed to serve food and disappear. "I study music in school," Sarah admitted quietly. "But I'm not very good yet." This was not true at all. Sarah was one of the best piano students at her school. She had been playing for 20 years and had won competitions. But she had learned to be humble about her talents. People did not like waitresses who acted like they were special. Marcus studied her face for a moment. He seemed to be thinking about something. The room got quiet except for the soft sounds of silverware on plates and wine being poured. "You know what?" Marcus said suddenly, his voice getting louder. "This is supposed to be a celebration dinner. We just closed a huge deal and here we are sitting next to this amazing piano that nobody is playing." He gestured toward the Steinway with his wine glass. The other businessmen murmured agreement, though Sarah could tell they were just agreeing because Marcus was the important one at the table. Marcus turned back to Sarah with a grin that seemed both mischievous and challenging. "Why don't you give us a little performance? I bet you've got some real talent hiding behind that apron." Sarah felt her heart skip a beat. Was he serious? She looked around the table at all the men watching her. They seemed amused by Marcus's suggestion, like it was just part of the evening's entertainment. "Oh, I couldn't," Sarah said quickly. "I'm working, and I don't think my manager would—" "Don't worry about your manager," Marcus interrupted. "I'll handle that. Come on, just one song. We're all friends here." Sarah could tell from his tone that Marcus was not really expecting her to say yes. This was the kind of joking suggestion rich people made sometimes, like asking the valet to sing opera or asking the bartender to juggle. It was meant to be funny, not serious. But something inside Sarah stirred. Maybe it was because she was tired of being invisible. Maybe it was because she missed playing piano so much it hurt. Maybe it was because she was tired of pretending she was not good at the thing she loved most in the world. The other men were smiling and waiting for her to laugh off the suggestion and go back to serving food. That's what a normal waitress would do. That's what Sarah should do. Instead, Sarah did something that surprised everyone in the room, including herself. She set down her serving tray on the side table. The room got very quiet. Marcus's smile faded as he realized she was taking his suggestion seriously. The other businessmen looked confused. This was not going according to the usual script. Sarah reached behind her back and untied her apron. She folded it neatly and placed it next to her tray. Her hands were shaking slightly, but her voice was steady when she spoke. "What would you like me to play?" she asked. Marcus blinked in surprise. He clearly had not expected this response. For a moment he seemed speechless. The other men at the table looked at each other with raised eyebrows. Nobody knew what to do next. Well, Marcus stammered. "I don't know. Whatever you want to play." Sarah nodded and walked toward the piano. Each step felt surreal, like she was walking in a dream. Part of her could not believe she was doing this. She could lose her job. Her manager might fire her on the spot. She needed this job desperately, but another part of her felt more alive than she had in months. She was about to play piano again. Real piano, not just practice exercises in a tiny practice room. She was about to make music. Sarah reached the piano bench and sat down. The leather seat was soft and comfortable. She adjusted her position and placed her feet on the pedals. Everything felt perfect, like the piano had been waiting for her. She placed her hands on the keys and felt a shiver run through her body. The keys were cool and smooth under her fingers. She pressed one key softly and heard the pure, clear tone ring through the room. The piano was perfectly tuned. Behind her, the 6 businessmen sat in complete silence. Sarah could feel them watching her, probably wondering what they had gotten themselves into. Marcus was likely regretting his casual suggestion, but Sarah was no longer thinking about them. She was no longer thinking about her job or her money problems or her tired feet. She was thinking about music. She took a deep breath and let her training take over. Her grandmother had always told her that when she sat at a piano, she should forget everything else and just let the music flow through her. That's exactly what Sarah planned to do. She knew exactly what piece she wanted to play. It was a piece that would show these men that she was not just a waitress who played a little bit. It was a piece that would prove she was a real musician. Sarah placed her fingers in position and prepared to play Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2. It was one of the most difficult and beautiful pieces ever written for piano. It was also the piece that had won her first major competition when she was 16. As she prepared to begin, Sarah realized that this moment would either be the biggest mistake of her life or the beginning of something amazing. There was only one way to find out which one it would be. Sarah sat at the piano bench, her fingers resting lightly on the keys. The room behind her was completely silent. She could almost feel the 6 men holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. For a moment, doubt crept into her mind. What was she doing? She was supposed to be working, serving food, making tips. Instead, she was sitting at an expensive piano in front of some of the richest men in Chicago, about to play classical music. This was crazy. But then Sarah remembered why she had started playing piano in the first place. It was not for money or fame or to impress anyone. It was because music was part of her soul. When she played, she felt complete. When she played, she felt like herself. She closed her eyes and let her mind drift back to her childhood. She remembered sitting next to her grandmother on the old piano bench in her house. Her grandmother's wrinkled hands guiding her small fingers to the right keys. "Music is a gift, Mija," her grandmother used to say. "When you have a gift, you must share it with the world." Sarah opened her eyes and looked down at the beautiful black and white keys. This Steinway was nothing like her grandmother's old upright piano. But the feeling was the same. The music was waiting inside, ready to come out. Behind her, she heard someone clear their throat quietly. One of the businessmen whispered something to another, but she could not make out the words. Marcus Chen said nothing, but Sarah could feel his eyes on her back. He was probably wondering if he had made a terrible mistake by encouraging her. Sarah knew she could still back out. She could stand up, make a joke about being too nervous, and go back to serving dinner. Everyone would laugh, and it would become a funny story they told later. The weird waitress who almost played piano for them. Instead, Sarah placed her hands in the correct position for Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2. This was not an easy piece to play. It required years of training, strong fingers, and complete concentration. Most amateur piano players could never handle it, but Sarah was not an amateur, even if these men did not know that yet. She had first learned this piece when she was 16. Her piano teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, had said she was too young for such a difficult composition. But Sarah had been stubborn. She practiced for hours every day for months until she could play it perfectly. It was the piece that won her a full scholarship to music school. Now, 8 years later, Sarah knew this piece like she knew her own heartbeat. She could play it with her eyes closed. She could play it in her sleep. It was part of her. Sarah took one final deep breath and began to play. The first notes of the concerto filled the room softly like a gentle whisper. Rachmaninoff had written this piece to start quietly, almost sadly. The melody was beautiful but haunting, like someone remembering a lost love. Sarah's fingers moved across the keys with perfect precision. Each note was clear and strong. She had not played a real piano in 2 weeks, but her muscle memory was perfect. Her hands knew exactly where to go. Behind her, the silence was complete. No one was eating, no one was drinking, no one was talking. The only sound in the room was the piano. As the piece continued, Sarah felt herself falling into the music. This was what she had been missing. This feeling of being connected to something bigger than herself. When she played, she was not just Sarah the waitress who was struggling to pay for school. She was Sarah the musician, Sarah the artist. The melody began to build, becoming more complex and powerful. Sarah's left hand played the deep bass notes while her right hand danced through the higher melodies. Her fingers moved faster now, but every note was still perfect. Marcus Chen felt his mouth drop open. This was not what he had expected at all. When he had jokingly suggested that the waitress play piano, he thought she might know a few simple songs, maybe Happy Birthday or some popular music. He never imagined she would play classical music, and certainly not at this level. The other men at the table were equally shocked. They had come here for a business dinner, expecting good food, and wine and conversation about their latest deal. None of them had expected to hear a concert-quality piano performance from their waitress. But Sarah was not thinking about any of them now. She was lost in the music, letting Rachmaninoff's genius flow through her fingers. The piece was telling a story of love and loss, hope and despair, triumph and tragedy. Sarah knew this story well because it felt like her own life. The music grew louder and more dramatic. Sarah's hands were moving across the entire keyboard now, playing complex harmonies that filled every corner of the room. Her years of training were showing. This was not just someone who could play piano. This was someone who understood music at the deepest level. Outside the private dining room, other people in the restaurant began to notice the music. A waiter stopped what he was doing and listened. A couple at a nearby table put down their forks and turned toward the sound. Even the busy kitchen staff paused to hear the beautiful piano music coming from somewhere in the restaurant. Sarah played on, unaware of the growing audience. She was completely focused on the music, on making each phrase perfect, on telling Rachmaninoff's story the way it deserved to be told. This was why she had spent 20 years learning to play piano. This was why she practiced until her fingers hurt. This was her purpose. The piece moved through its different sections, sometimes soft and gentle, sometimes powerful and dramatic. Sarah's face showed the emotion of the music. When the melody was sad, her expression was thoughtful and melancholy. When the music became triumphant, her face lit up with joy. Marcus Chen found himself leaning forward in his chair, completely captivated. He had been to many concerts in his life. He owned season tickets to the Chicago Symphony Orchestra. He had heard some of the world's best pianists perform, but there was something special about hearing this music in this setting, played by someone he had assumed was just a waitress. The other businessmen were equally mesmerized. These were practical men who spent their days thinking about profits and losses, contracts and negotiations. Music was not usually part of their world, but even they could recognize that something extraordinary was happening. As Sarah played, she felt all the stress and exhaustion of the past months melting away. This was what she was meant to do. This was who she really was. Not Sarah the waitress, not Sarah the struggling student, but Sarah the pianist. The piece was building toward its climax now. Sarah's hands moved with incredible speed and precision across the keys. The music was so complex that it sounded like an entire orchestra was playing, not just one person on a piano, but Sarah made it look effortless, like she was just having a conversation with an old friend. In the main dining room, more people had noticed the music. Some had stopped eating entirely and were trying to figure out where it was coming from. The restaurant manager, Mr. Romano, had come out of his office to investigate. He could not believe that someone was playing the piano in his private dining room. But Sarah knew none of this. She was approaching the end of the piece now, the final section that would bring Rachmaninoff's story to its conclusion. Her heart was pounding not from nervousness but from the pure joy of making music. This was the feeling she had been missing. This was what made all her struggles worthwhile. As she prepared to play the final notes, Sarah realized that her life was about to change. She did not know how or why, but she could feel it. This moment, this decision to play was going to lead to something different, something better. She played the last few measures with all the passion and skill she possessed, pouring her heart into every note. And as the final chord rang out in the silent room, Sarah Martinez knew that she would never be the same again. The final note of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 hung in the air like a perfect crystal. Sarah kept her hands on the keys for a moment longer, feeling the vibration of the strings slowly fade away. The silence that followed was so complete that she could hear her own heartbeat. She had done it. She had played one of the most difficult pieces in all of classical music, and she had played it perfectly. Every note had been exactly where it should be. Every phrase had told its part of the story. Every emotion had been pure and true. Just a moment. Sarah forgot where she was. She forgot about the 6 businessmen sitting behind her. She forgot about her job and her money problems and her tired feet. She was just a musician who had shared something beautiful with the world. Then, reality came flooding back. Sarah slowly turned around on the piano bench to face the room. What she saw made her gasp. Not only were the 6 men at the table staring at her with their mouths open, but the doorway to the private dining room was crowded with people. Waiters, customers from other tables, even the kitchen staff had come to listen. Everyone was looking at her. The silence stretched on for what felt like hours, but was probably only a few seconds. Sarah felt her cheeks burning with embarrassment. Had she made a terrible mistake? Were they shocked because she was bad? Did she sound awful and not realize it? Then Marcus Chen started to clap. It began slowly, just his hands coming together in steady applause. But within seconds, everyone else joined in. The other businessmen at the table stood up as they clapped. The people in the doorway burst into enthusiastic applause. Someone in the back let out a loud "Bravo!" The applause grew louder and more energetic. People were not just clapping politely. They were cheering, whistling, calling out praise. Sarah had never heard applause like this, not even at her competition performances. This was the sound of people who had been truly moved by music. Sarah felt tears starting to form in her eyes. She had been so worried about making a mistake, about getting in trouble, about looking foolish. She never expected this reaction. She never expected people to be so genuinely excited by her playing. Marcus Chen was the first to approach the piano. His face showed complete amazement. When he had suggested that Sarah play, he thought he might hear a nice amateur performance of a simple song. He never imagined he would witness something like this. Marcus paused, searching for the right words. That was incredible. Absolutely incredible. The other men from the table crowded around the piano, all talking at once. Where did you learn to play like that? That was better than the symphony. I can't believe you work as a waitress. You should be on stage. Sarah felt overwhelmed by all the attention. She was used to being invisible at work, just another servant bringing food and cleaning tables. She was not used to being the center of attention, especially not for her music. Thank you, she managed to say. Thank you so much. Marcus held up his hand to quiet the others. He wanted to talk to Sarah, and he could see she was feeling overwhelmed by all the excitement. Seriously, he said, looking directly into her eyes. Where did you learn to play like that? That was professional-level performance. That was concert hall quality. Sarah took a deep breath, trying to organize her thoughts. She was still shaking a little from the adrenaline of performing and the shock of the reaction. I've been playing since I was 4, she said. My grandmother taught me first, then I had private lessons. I won some competitions in high school, which got me a scholarship to music school. You're in music school now? Marcus asked. Yes, at the Chicago College of Performing Arts. I'm studying piano performance. Sarah hesitated, then added, I'm supposed to graduate this year, but what? Sarah looked down at her hands. This was the hard part to talk about. The part that embarrassed her, the part that reminded her of all her current problems. I lost my scholarship last year when my family had financial trouble. My father lost his job and they needed help. So now I work here to pay for school, but it's really hard to keep up with both. The room had gotten quieter as people listened to Sarah's story. Some of the crowd from the doorway had gone back to their tables, but Marcus and his business associates were hanging on every word. So you work here at night and go to school during the day? One of the other men asked. I work double shifts, when I can get them, Sarah explained. I also work at a coffee shop on weekends. It's the only way I can afford tuition and help my family. Marcus shook his head in disbelief. You're telling me that someone with your talent is working as a waitress just to survive? Sarah felt defensive. There was nothing wrong with being a waitress. It was honest work and she was good at it, but she understood what he meant. It did seem like a waste for someone who could play like she just did. I do what I have to do, Sarah said simply. Marcus was quiet for a moment, thinking. Sarah could see his mind working like he was solving a complex problem. She had read enough about him to know that he was famous for making quick decisions that changed everything. What's your name? Marcus asked. Sarah. Sarah Martinez. Well, Sarah Martinez, I think you just changed my life. And I have a feeling I'm about to change yours. Before Sarah could ask what he meant, Mr. Romano, the restaurant manager, pushed through the crowd. He looked worried and confused. He had heard the music from his office and came to investigate, only to find his private dining room turned into a concert hall. Sarah, he said, his voice stern. What are you doing? You're supposed to be working. Sarah felt her heart sink. She had been so caught up in the moment that she forgot she could get in trouble for this. Mr. Romano was a fair boss, but he ran a business. He could not have his waitresses abandoning their duties to play piano no matter how well they played. I'm sorry, Mr. Romano, Sarah began. She was just giving us the most amazing performance we've ever heard, Marcus interrupted, stepping between Sarah and her manager. I asked her to play and she was incredible. Mr. Romano looked confused. He recognized Marcus Chen from the news and knew he was very important. But he also had a restaurant to run. I appreciate that, Mr. Chen, but my employees have duties. How much does Sarah make here in a night? Marcus asked suddenly. I'm sorry? In tips and wages, how much does she typically make in one shift? Mr. Romano looked uncomfortable discussing an employee's wages in front of customers. Well, that varies, but probably around. Marcus pulled out his wallet and counted out several $100 bills. He handed them to Mr. Romano. There. That should cover whatever she would have made tonight, plus extra for the trouble. Sarah is done working for the evening. Mr. Romano stared at the money in his hand. It was more than Sarah would make in a week. Now, Marcus said, turning back to Sarah, we need to talk. Sarah stared at Marcus Chen in shock. She could not believe what had just happened. One moment she was serving appetizers, and the next moment a billionaire was paying her manager so she could stop working and talk to him. It felt like a dream. You didn't have to do that, Sarah said quietly, looking at the money in Mr. Romano's hand. I could have gotten in real trouble. Well, now you won't, Marcus replied with a smile. Come on, sit down. I want to hear your whole story. The other businessmen had moved back to give them some space, though they were clearly still interested in what was happening. The crowd from the doorway had mostly disappeared, returning to their own dinners. But Sarah could see people at other tables still glancing over at the private dining room. Marcus pulled out a chair for Sarah at his table. She hesitated for a moment. It felt strange to sit with customers instead of serving them. But everything about this evening was strange, so she sat down. First, Marcus said, settling back into his own chair, I need you to understand something. I go to a lot of concerts. I mean a lot. I have season tickets to the Chicago Symphony, the Lyric Opera, the Chamber Music Series. I've heard some of the best classical musicians in the world perform. Sarah nodded, not sure where he was going with this. What you just played, Marcus continued, was as good as anything I've ever heard. Maybe better. The technical skill was perfect, but more than that, you made me feel something. You told a story with that music. Sarah felt her cheeks getting warm again. She was not used to praise like this, especially from someone who clearly knew what he was talking about. Thank you, she said. That piece means a lot to me. I've been playing it for years. How many years exactly have you been playing piano? Marcus asked. 20 years this month, Sarah answered. My grandmother started teaching me when I was 4. She used to say that music was the language of the soul. Your grandmother sounds like a wise woman. She was. She died 3 years ago. Sarah's voice got soft when she talked about her grandmother. She never got to hear me play that piece. She always said I would be a great pianist someday, but I don't think she ever imagined I would play something that difficult. Marcus leaned forward, genuinely interested. Tell me about your training. Who did you study with? Sarah felt herself relaxing as she talked about music. This was her favorite subject, the thing she was most passionate about. After my grandmother, I studied with Mrs. Rodriguez at the community center. She's the one who entered me in my first competition when I was 8. I won 2nd place, and after that, my parents found a way to pay for better lessons. What competitions did you win? Marcus asked. Sarah felt a little embarrassed. She did not like to brag about her achievements. I won the state junior piano competition 3 times. I was the youngest winner they ever had. That's what got me the scholarship to the Chicago College of Performing Arts. One of the other businessmen, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. Wait, you won the state competition 3 times, that's incredible. I remember reading about that in the newspaper years ago. There was a girl who was so good they had to change the rules so older kids could still compete. Sarah nodded. That was me. They made it so you could only win twice in each age category after that. Marcus whistled softly. So you're not just talented, you're award-winning talented. What happened to your scholarship? This was the part Sarah did not like talking about. The part that reminded her of how much her life had changed in the past year. My father worked at a factory that made car parts. The company moved their operations to Mexico and he lost his job. He looked for work for months but couldn't find anything that paid enough. My mother works part-time at a grocery store, but that's not much money. Sarah paused, remembering how difficult that time had been for her family. They needed help with the mortgage and groceries and bills. I had to make a choice, keep my scholarship and watch my family lose their house, or give up school to help them. That's an impossible choice for someone your age to have to make, Marcus said gently. I tried to do both at first. I kept going to school and got a job to send money home. But I couldn't work enough hours to really help and still focus on my studies. My grades started to slip and I lost the scholarship. So now you're paying for school yourself while supporting your family? I'm trying to, Sarah said, but it's really hard. I work here 4 nights a week plus weekends at a coffee shop. I take as many classes as I can afford each semester, but at this rate, it will take me 3 more years to graduate. If I can, even keep up with the payments. Marcus shook his head. That's criminal. Someone with your talent should be focusing on music, not worrying about paying bills. I practice when I can, Sarah said, but it's not the same as when I could spend 6 hours a day at the piano. Sometimes I worry that I'm losing my skills. Trust me, Marcus said firmly. You are not losing your skills. What you played tonight was extraordinary. Sarah looked down at her hands. These were the same hands that had just played Rachmaninoff, but now they looked like the hands of a waitress, a little rough from work with a small burn mark on her thumb from touching a hot plate last week. I still dream about being a concert pianist, she admitted. I know it sounds silly now that I'm working in a restaurant, but I still think about performing in great concert halls, recording albums, maybe even playing with orchestras. It doesn't sound silly at all, Marcus said. It sounds like exactly what should happen. Sarah looked up at him, confused. What do you mean? Marcus was quiet for a moment, and Sarah could see him thinking carefully about his words. When he spoke, his voice was serious and determined. Sarah, I want to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. Okay. If money was not a problem, if you didn't have to work, if your family was taken care of, if you could focus completely on music, what would you do? Sarah did not have to think about it. The answer came immediately. I would practice 6 hours a day. I would take lessons with the best teachers. I would enter competitions and apply for graduate programs. I would do everything I could to become the best pianist I could be. That's what I thought you would say, Marcus said with a smile. Now let me ask you something else. What if I told you that could happen? What if I told you there was a way for you to focus completely on music without worrying about money? Sarah felt her heart start beating faster. I would say that sounds too good to be true. Maybe it is, Marcus said. Or maybe you just met the right person at the right time. Sarah stared at him, not sure what he was suggesting. I don't understand. Marcus leaned forward and looked directly into her eyes. Sarah Martinez, I want to help you become the concert pianist you're meant to be. If you'll let me. The room seemed to spin around Sarah. She felt like she was still dreaming, like none of this could really be happening. Help me how? I want to pay for the rest of your education. I want to connect you with the best piano teachers in the country. I want to give you opportunities to perform and get noticed by the right people in the classical music world. Sarah's mouth dropped open. She could not speak for a moment. Why? She finally managed to ask. Why would you do that for someone you just met? Marcus smiled, and for the first time that evening he looked almost shy. Because 20 minutes ago you showed me something I had forgotten. You reminded me why I fell in love with music in the first place. And because talent like yours is too rare and too precious to waste. Sarah felt like the world had stopped spinning. She stared at Marcus Chen, trying to understand what he had just said. He wanted to help her become a concert pianist. He wanted to pay for her education. He wanted to give her opportunities. It was everything she had ever dreamed of, offered by a complete stranger. I don't know what to say, Sarah stammered. Her voice sounded strange to her own ears, like it was coming from somewhere far away. You don't have to say anything right now, Marcus replied gently. I know this is a lot to take in, but I'm completely serious about this offer. Sarah's mind was racing. Part of her wanted to jump up and shout yes immediately. This was the answer to all her problems, the solution to every worry that kept her awake at night. But another part of her was suspicious. In her experience, when something seemed too good to be true, it usually was. Why me? She asked. You must know other musicians. You said you go to concerts all the time. Why would you want to help someone you just met? Marcus considered her question carefully. He could tell that Sarah was not the kind of person who trusted easily, especially when it came to offers that seemed too generous. That's a fair question, he said. Let me tell you something about myself that might help you understand. Marcus paused and looked around the room at his business associates who were still listening to every word. You guys go ahead and finish your dinner, he told them. Sarah and I need to talk privately. The other men nodded and moved to the far end of the table, giving Marcus and Sarah space to continue their conversation without being overheard. When I was growing up, Marcus began, my family had no money. My parents came here from Taiwan with nothing but hope and determination. My father worked in a restaurant kitchen 16 hours a day. My mother cleaned office buildings at night. Sarah listened carefully, surprised to hear that someone as wealthy as Marcus Chen had come from humble beginnings. I was good with computers, but we couldn't afford a computer for me to practice on. I used to go to the public library every day after school and stay until they closed, just so I could learn programming on their old machines. Marcus's voice became more emotional as he continued. When I was 15, I entered a programming competition. The prize was a full scholarship to a summer computer camp that cost more money than my family made in 3 months. I won the competition, but when the organizers found out I couldn't afford to travel to the camp or buy the equipment I would need, they almost gave the scholarship to someone else. What happened? Sarah asked. A man I had never met stepped in and helped. He was a successful businessman who had heard about my situation. He paid for everything: travel, equipment, even spending money. He said he saw potential in me and didn't want it to be wasted. Sarah began to understand where Marcus was going with this story. That summer camp changed my life, Marcus continued. I learned things that helped me create my first company. Without that man's help, I would probably still be fixing computers in some repair shop instead of running a technology empire. Did you ever see him again? Sarah asked. Many times. He became my mentor and eventually one of my closest friends. When I sold my first company for millions of dollars, the first thing I did was pay him back, but he refused to take the money. Marcus smiled at the memory. He told me that the best way to repay him was to do the same thing for someone else someday, to find a person with talent who just needed an opportunity and help them succeed. Sarah felt her eyes filling with tears as she listened to Marcus's story. She could see the sincerity in his face, hear the emotion in his voice. This was not just a rich man trying to show off. This was someone who understood what it felt like to have talent but no opportunities. So you see, Marcus said, this is not just about you. This is about me keeping a promise I made to someone who changed my life. When I heard you play tonight, I knew I had found the person I was supposed to help. Sarah wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. She was not used to crying in front of strangers, but she could not help herself. What exactly are you offering? She asked. Marcus's tone became more businesslike, but his warmth remained. First, I want to pay off any remaining tuition you owe for this school year and next year. I want you to be able to graduate without worrying about money." Sarah's heart jumped. Her current debt for school was over $40,000, and she owed another $30,000 for her final year. It was an impossible amount of money for someone in her situation. "Second," Marcus continued, "I want to arrange for you to study with Elena Volkov." Sarah gasped. Elena Volkov was one of the most famous piano teachers in the world. She had taught some of the greatest concert pianists of the past 20 years. Studying with her was like a basketball player getting to train with the greatest coach in the sport. "Elena Volkov doesn't take new students," Sarah said. "I read that she has a waiting list of 5 years and she only teaches people who are already professional musicians." "Elena Volkov is a friend of mine," Marcus replied with a slight smile. "I helped fund the renovation of her studio last year. I think I can convince her to make an exception." Sarah could barely believe what she was hearing. Elena Volkov as her teacher would open doors she had never even dreamed of. "Third," Marcus went on, "I want to arrange performance opportunities for you. Real performances, not just student recitals. I know people who organize concerts, people who work with orchestras, people who can get you noticed by the right audiences. And fourth," Marcus said, his voice becoming very serious, "I want to take care of your family's financial situation so you don't have to worry about them while you're focusing on your career." Sarah felt dizzy. This was more than she had ever dared to hope for. It was like someone had reached into her dreams and pulled out everything she had ever wanted. "I can't accept all of that," she said quietly. "It's too much. I don't deserve it." Marcus reached across the table and gently took her hands in his. "Sarah, let me tell you something. In my business, I evaluate investments every day. I look for opportunities where a small amount of money can create huge returns. What I'm offering you is not charity. It's an investment. An investment in what? In your talent, in your potential, in what you can become." Marcus's eyes were bright with excitement. "I believe that with the right support you can become one of the great classical pianists of your generation. And when that happens, you'll inspire other people the same way you inspired me tonight." Sarah looked down at their joined hands. Marcus's hands were soft and clean, the hands of someone who had never had to work in a restaurant or worry about paying bills. But there was strength in them too, and warmth. "What would you want in return?" she asked. It seemed impossible that someone would offer so much without expecting something back. "I want you to succeed," Marcus said simply. "I want you to become the musician you're meant to be. And someday, when you're famous and successful, I want you to help someone else the way I'm helping you now." Sarah looked up at him, searching his face for any sign that this was not real. But all she saw was sincerity and hope. "I need to think about this," she said finally. "It's the biggest decision of my life." "Of course," Marcus agreed. "Take all the time you need. But Sarah, don't let this opportunity pass because you're afraid to accept help. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let someone else believe in your dreams." 3 weeks had passed since that incredible night at Romano's restaurant. Sarah still felt like she was living in a dream. Every morning when she woke up, she had to remind herself that it had really happened. Marcus Chen had really offered to change her life, and she had said yes. The first thing Marcus did was exactly what he promised. He paid off all of Sarah's school debt and prepaid her final year of tuition. When Sarah went to the financial aid office to check on her account, the woman behind the desk looked confused. "There must be some mistake," the woman said, staring at her computer screen. "Your account shows a zero balance and there's a note here about a full scholarship for next year." Sarah smiled. "No mistake. Someone very generous decided to help me out." But the money was just the beginning. Within a week, Marcus had arranged for Sarah to quit both of her jobs. Mr. Romano at the restaurant was sad to see her go, but he understood. The coffee shop manager was less understanding until Marcus sent someone to pay them enough money to hire 2 replacement workers. "You don't need to work anymore," Marcus had told Sarah. "Your only job now is to become the best pianist you can be." For the first time in over a year, Sarah woke up each morning without the exhaustion that came from working until midnight. She could practice piano for hours without worrying about being late for her shift. She could focus on her classes without falling asleep from tiredness. But the biggest change came when Marcus arranged for Sarah to meet Elena Volkov. Sarah had been nervous for days before the meeting. Elena Volkov was a legend in the classical music world. She had performed with the greatest orchestras on earth before becoming a teacher. Her students regularly won the most important piano competitions in the world. The meeting took place at Elena's private studio in downtown Chicago. The studio was in a beautiful old building that had once been a mansion. Elena had converted the main ballroom into a music room with 3 grand pianos and perfect acoustics. When Sarah first walked into that room, she felt intimidated. This was where some of the world's best pianists had studied. The walls were covered with photographs of Elena with famous musicians, awards from prestigious competitions, and reviews from concerts all over the world. Elena Volkov herself was not what Sarah expected. She was a small woman in her 70s with silver hair and bright blue eyes. She was elegantly dressed and had the kind of posture that came from years of perfect piano technique. "So, you are the young woman Marcus told me about," Elena said, in her slight Russian accent. "He says you have extraordinary talent. I hope I won't disappoint you," Sarah replied nervously. Elena smiled. "We will see. Play something for me." Sarah sat at one of the grand pianos and played the same Rachmaninoff piece she had performed at the restaurant. But this time, she was playing for one of the world's greatest piano teachers. This time, every note mattered. When Sarah finished, Elena was quiet for a long moment. She walked over to the piano and looked at Sarah's hands, studying the position of her fingers on the keys. "Again," Elena said simply, "but this time think about the story you are telling." Rachmaninoff wrote this piece during a very difficult time in his life. He was struggling with depression and felt like he had lost his ability to create music. This concerto was his way of fighting back against that darkness. "Play it like you. Understand that fight?" Sarah played the piece again, this time thinking about what Elena had said. She tried to put more emotion into the music, to tell the story of someone fighting against despair. When she finished the second time, Elena nodded slowly. "You have good technique," Elena said. "Very good, actually. But more importantly, you have something that cannot be taught. You have a musical soul. You feel the music not just in your mind but in your heart." Sarah felt a rush of pride and relief. Elena Volkov, one of the world's greatest teachers, thought she had talent. "However," Elena continued, and Sarah's stomach dropped, "your training has gaps. You play beautifully, but you could play magnificently. You understand music emotionally, but you need to understand it intellectually as well." Elena walked around the piano, studying Sarah like a doctor examining a patient. "If you are serious about becoming a concert pianist, truly serious, you must be prepared to work harder than you have ever worked before. I will teach you things about music that will change how you hear every piece you play, but it will not be easy." "I'm ready," Sarah said immediately. "I'll work as hard as you want me to." Elena smiled for the first time since Sarah had arrived. "Good. We begin tomorrow. 6 hours a day, 5 days a week. And I warn you, I am not an easy teacher. I expect perfection." From that day forward, Sarah's life became completely focused on music. She spent 6 hours every day in Elena's studio, working on technique, interpretation, musical theory, and performance skills. Elena pushed her harder than any teacher ever had. "Your left hand is lazy," Elena would call out during practice. "Make it work as hard as your right hand." Or, "You are playing the notes, but where is the music? Anyone can hit keys. You must make them sing." At first, Sarah was exhausted after each lesson. Elena's standards were incredibly high and she never seemed satisfied. But slowly, Sarah began to understand what Elena was trying to teach her. She was learning not just how to play piano, but how to be a musician. After 2 months of intensive study with Elena, Marcus arranged for Sarah's first real performance opportunity. She would play as a guest soloist with the Chicago Chamber Orchestra in their winter concert series. "This is your chance to show the classical music world what you can do," Marcus told her. The audience will include music critics, other musicians, and people who book concerts. If you do well, it could lead to more opportunities. Sarah was terrified. She had performed in student recitals and competitions before, but never with a professional orchestra. Never in front of an audience that included people who could make or break a classical music career. Elena helped Sarah prepare for the performance with even more intensity than usual. They chose Mozart's Piano Concerto No. 23, a beautiful but challenging piece that would showcase Sarah's technical skills and musical understanding. Mozart is not just about playing the right notes, Elena explained. Mozart is about perfection. Every phrase must be elegant. Every ornament must be placed exactly right. There is nowhere to hide in Mozart. Any mistake will be obvious. Sarah practiced the Mozart concerto until she could play it in her sleep. She worked on it with Elena, practiced it alone for hours, and even played along with recordings to make sure she understood how it should sound with the orchestra. The night of the concert finally arrived. Sarah stood backstage at Symphony Center, the same hall where she had dreamed of performing since she was a child. She was wearing a beautiful black evening gown that Marcus had bought for her, and her hair was styled elegantly. As she waited for her entrance, Sarah thought about how much her life had changed in just a few months. 6 months ago, she had been serving food and worrying about paying rent. Now she was about to perform Mozart with a professional orchestra in one of the most important concert halls in America. The orchestra finished the first piece on the program, and then it was time for Sarah's performance. She walked onto the stage. To warm applause, sat at the beautiful concert grand piano and looked out at the audience. In the front row, she could see Marcus Chen smiling at her. A few rows back, she spotted Elena Volkov, looking serious and focused. Throughout the hall, she saw faces of people she did not know, but who would judge her performance and decide whether she had a future as a concert pianist. Sarah took a deep breath, placed her hands on the keys, and began to play Mozart's Piano Concerto No. 23. As the first notes filled the concert hall, she felt the same feeling she had experienced that night at Romano's restaurant, the feeling of being exactly where she belonged. The performance was everything Sarah had hoped for and more. She played with technical precision and deep musical understanding. The orchestra followed her lead perfectly, and together they created something beautiful. When the final notes faded away, the audience erupted in applause that seemed to go on forever. As Sarah took her bows on stage, she looked out at the audience and realized that her life as a professional musician had just begun. 2 years had passed since that magical night at Romano's restaurant, and Sarah Martinez could hardly recognize her own life. As she stood in the wings of Carnegie Hall in New York City, preparing for the most important performance of her career, she thought about the incredible journey that had brought her here. The performance with the Chicago Chamber Orchestra had been just the beginning. Word spread quickly through the classical music world about the talented young pianist who had appeared seemingly from nowhere. Music critics wrote glowing reviews. Other orchestras started calling with offers to perform. Recording companies expressed interest in working with her. Elena Volkov had been right about one thing. Becoming a concert pianist required harder work than Sarah had ever imagined. For 2 years, she had practiced 6 to 8 hours every day. She had studied music theory, learned dozens of new pieces, and performed in concerts across the United States and Europe. Marcus Chen had kept every promise he made. He arranged for Sarah to perform with major orchestras in Chicago, Boston, and San Francisco. He connected her with the right people in the music industry. He even helped her record her first album, which featured the same Rachmaninoff Piano Concerto No. 2 that had started everything. But most importantly, Marcus had given Sarah the gift of being able to focus completely on her music. She never had to worry about money or work or any of the practical problems that had once consumed her life. She could be purely a musician. Tonight's performance at Carnegie Hall was special for many reasons. It was Sarah's debut at the most famous classical music venue in America. It was being recorded for national radio broadcast, and it was sold out, with music lovers from around the world coming to hear the young pianist who had become one of classical music's rising stars. Sarah peeked out at the audience from behind the curtain. Carnegie Hall was magnificent with its perfect acoustics and elegant design. The audience was dressed in their finest clothes, and she could feel the excitement in the air. These were people who loved classical music and had high expectations for tonight's performance. In the VIP section, Sarah spotted a familiar face that made her smile. Marcus Chen was sitting in the front row, beaming with pride. Next to him was Elena Volkov, looking as elegant and serious as always. In another section, Sarah could see her parents and her younger brother, who had flown in from Chicago for this special night. Her family's life had changed dramatically too. With Marcus's help, Sarah had been able to pay off her parents' mortgage and help her father start a small business. Her mother no longer had to work nights cleaning offices. Her brother was now in college studying engineering, with his tuition paid by a scholarship fund that Marcus had set up. But tonight was about more than just Sarah's success. It was about proving that talent and hard work, combined with opportunity, could transform a life completely. The stage manager gave Sarah the signal. It was time. Sarah walked onto the stage of Carnegie Hall to thunderous applause. She was wearing a stunning red evening gown and felt more confident than she ever had before. This was her stage now. This was her world. She sat at the beautiful Steinway concert grand piano, the same type of piano where her journey had begun that night at Romano's. As the applause died down, Sarah looked out at the audience and spoke. "Good evening," she said, her voice clear and strong. 2 years ago, I was working as a waitress in a restaurant in Chicago. I thought my dreams of becoming a concert pianist were impossible. Tonight, I want to dedicate this performance to everyone who has ever been told their dreams are too big, and to the people who help make impossible dreams come true. The audience applauded again, and Sarah could see Marcus wiping tears from his eyes. Sarah had chosen to perform 3 pieces tonight. The first was a Bach prelude and fugue that showed off her technical precision. The second was a Chopin nocturne that demonstrated her ability to create beautiful, emotional music. And the third was the piece that had started everything, Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, performed with the New York Philharmonic Orchestra. Each piece was performed flawlessly. Sarah had never played better in her life. Her technique was perfect. Her musical interpretation was mature and sophisticated, and her connection with the audience was electric. This was what she had been born to do. When she began the Rachmaninoff Concerto, Sarah felt herself transported back to that night at Romano's. She remembered the fear she had felt when Marcus jokingly suggested she play piano. She remembered the courage it had taken to sit down at that piano and play for strangers. She remembered the moment when her life changed forever. As Sarah played, she poured all of her gratitude and joy into the music. She played for her grandmother, who had first taught her to love piano. She played for her parents, who had sacrificed so much to support her dreams. She played for Elena, who had taught her to be not just a good pianist but a great one. And she played for Marcus, who had seen something special in a tired waitress and had given her the chance to become who she was meant to be. The performance was magical. The orchestra and Sarah worked together perfectly, creating music that seemed to lift the audience out of their seats. When the final notes faded away, there was a moment of perfect silence before the audience exploded in the longest standing ovation of Sarah's career. People were cheering, crying, and calling bravo. Sarah took bow after bow. Flowers were thrown onto the stage, and the applause seemed like it would never end. After the concert, there was a reception for Sarah and the special guests. The room was filled with music industry professionals, wealthy, donors, and classical music lovers, all wanting to congratulate Sarah on her triumph. Marcus was one of the first to reach her. He gave her a big hug and spoke into her ear so she could hear him over the crowd. "I am so proud of you," he said. "You were absolutely magnificent tonight." "I have something for you," Sarah replied, reaching into her purse. She pulled out a small wrapped package and handed it to Marcus. Marcus opened the package to find a CD, a recording of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, the same piece Sarah had played that first night at Romano's. On the cover was a photo of Sarah at Carnegie Hall's piano, and it was signed to Marcus. "Thank you for believing in my dreams when I had almost stopped believing in them myself. With love and gratitude, Sarah." Marcus looked at the CD and then at Sarah, his eyes filled with emotion. "You know," he said, "that night at the restaurant I thought I was just making a joke when I asked you to play piano. I never imagined it would lead to this." Sarah smiled. "I never imagined it either. But I learned something important from you that night." "What's that?" "Sometimes the most important moments in our lives come when we least expect them. Sometimes all we need is someone to give us a chance, and sometimes all we need is the courage to take it." Elena Volkov joined them, looking more emotional than Sarah had ever seen her. "You have exceeded even my highest expectations," Elena told Sarah. "Tonight you were not just a pianist, you were an artist. You moved people's souls with your music." As the evening wound down, Sarah found herself standing alone for a moment on the empty stage of Carnegie Hall. The audience had gone home. The orchestra had packed up their instruments and the stage lights were dimmed. But Sarah could still feel the energy of the performance, the connection she had made with hundreds of people through her music. She walked over to the piano and sat down one more time. She played a few quiet notes, not a full piece, just some gentle melodies that came from her heart. As she played, Sarah thought about all the people who had helped her reach this moment. Her grandmother, who first taught her that music was the language of the soul. Her parents, who supported her dreams even when they seemed impossible. Elena, who pushed her to be better than she thought she could be. And Marcus, who saw potential in a struggling waitress and gave her the opportunity of a lifetime. But Sarah also thought about all the young musicians out there who were still struggling, still dreaming, still waiting for their chance. She thought about the music students working multiple jobs to pay for school, the talented artists performing in small venues hoping to be discovered, the dreamers who were close to giving up. Sarah made a decision that night. She would use her success to help others, just as she had been helped. She would create scholarships for young musicians. She would mentor students who needed guidance. She would look for the next talented person who just needed someone to believe in them. As Sarah finally left the stage of Carnegie Hall that night, she carried with her not just the satisfaction of achieving her dreams, but the responsibility of helping others achieve theirs. She had learned that success was not just about personal achievement. It was about using your gifts to make the world a little more beautiful and giving others the chance to do the same. The waitress who had served appetizers at Romano's restaurant was gone. In her place was Sarah Martinez, concert pianist, recording artist, and proof that sometimes the most extraordinary journeys begin with a single moment of courage. 3 months later, Sarah would establish the Martinez Foundation for Young Musicians, providing scholarships and opportunities for talented students from low-income families. The foundation's motto, inscribed on a plaque in their main office, read,